Sometimes I guess I used exercise as a way of processing negative emotions, that if I was feeling really ashamed of myself, I'd go out for a hard run. And that actually seemed to help. It felt like it was a form of catharsis through exercise.
Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Jeremy Nagel. Jeremy is a neuro-spicy software developer turned startup founder who is slightly obsessed with habits. He likes to start each day with a 2-hour morning routine and sometimes surprises colleagues by busting out a set of push-ups during meetings to keep the energy high. When he's not working on startups, he enjoys cross-country skiing, trail running, and cycling with his wife. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure.
And I know it hasn't come out yet, at least on the day we're recording this, but I was just on your show.
Yeah.
So that was fun. So tell people really quick what your show is called.
It's called Focus and Chill. It's a podcast about productivity for neurodivergent people.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a fun conversation. So you wanted to talk today about micro workouts to boost focus, and can busting out into jumping jacks or push-ups in the middle of a meeting, can that actually work for your focus?
I'll set some context here that I normally have my video off when I'm doing the push-ups, but it does help. I sometimes am in 4-hour-long meetings and my focus cannot keep up for that long, especially if I'm not presenting for the whole time. So I do find that it helps a lot. It's almost a form of what I call mechanical multitasking, where I'm doing things that don't really require my brain, but busy hands, quiet mind. I've got various things that I do. I've got a under-desk elliptical trainer that I'll pedal on if I'm in a meeting with a lot of people and I'm not particularly involved. But that really helps me to listen. Sometimes I'll go for a walk if I can have my camera off. I'll eat my lunch. Things like that seem to really help. And I find for me, I tend to get energy slumps sometimes throughout the day, especially in the afternoon. And one thing that I've experimented with is if I do bouts of exercise throughout the day, that seems to actually keep my energy levels a lot more consistent. So that's the idea of micro workouts. And there's some evidence around it being good for everyone, especially for neurodivergent people, in terms of keeping energy levels high, keeping focus high. And it's something that I originally started doing because I felt like I couldn't fit in a workout. I was too busy to do, say, a 20-minute gym workout. But I thought, what if I space out 21-minute workouts throughout the day? It's probably not as good from a fitness perspective, but I actually really liked it. I noticed not just the fitness side of it, but also the mood benefits and the energy level and focus benefits.
You know, it's interesting because my why behind, exercise and fitness is all about my brain. Like my body benefits from it, but I've seen and have experienced, well over a decade of my ADHD is really appreciative when I am regularly exercising. And my ADHD kicks my ass when I'm not.
Yep.
And it's funny because it's easy to forget the positive impact of it until it slips from us and then we get back to it and they're like, oh yeah, this
is what it feels like.
Yeah, because over the last decade or so, I've had a couple periods. I'm actually kind of in one right now where my exercise routine has been slipping a little bit. So it's not and I try to do 4 to 5 times a week. I really have cardio and it's a huge help for me. But, life's gotten busy and my local town has kind of screwed up the pickleball schedule for me, which has made it harder for me to be consistent on playing pickleball. But I do love this idea of micro workouts, especially when you're talking about when you mentioned that sometimes you have meetings that are 4 hours long. And, I will, during, a number of days of the week, we'll have meetings that seem to be 4 hours long because just kind of one meeting goes into the next, which goes into the next. And, by 3 or 4 o'clock, I'm just my brain is not processing information. And I don't know why this hasn't occurred to me to just be all right, I'm just turn my camera off and say, I'm listening. Although I guess I'm usually running the meetings, but not always. And to do some jumping jacks or to do something like some push-ups just quickly, And it's one of these, and I've even just taking breaks, which for me has always been a challenge because transitioning for me has always been a challenge. but thinking about ways to kind of integrate what did you call it? Mechanical multitasking into
Mm.
to what I'm doing is really interesting to me.
Mm. And in the right environment, maybe you don't even need to have your camera off. Maybe everyone might want to do some jumping jacks together if you're running the meeting and you have some influence.
Absolutely, and I have done that. I it would probably be beneficial to do that more often.
Mm.
I even like during like once a month in my adult study hall community, I run we call it Pomodoro dance party, which is
Mm.
basically it's a little more than 2 hours of a work session, and we have
Mhm.
two 50-minute work blocks.
Mhm.
Because I find like the 25-minute Pomodoro, I'm just getting engaged and like focused at about 23 minutes in. So it's like, great,
Mm.
2 minutes of work. Now it's time for a break. Right. So I
Mm.
find that 50-minute work block is great for me to really
Mm.
get some good work done. And there's a huge part of me that just wants to push on and keep working. And when I
Mhm.
actually take that break and actually do the dancing, right,
Mm.
it's amazing how helpful it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I find the same that it's very counterintuitive for me, the idea of breaks, because I feel like I'm in hyperfocus. I feel like I could keep going, but often when I step away for a bit, I have ideas when I'm away from my computer and I suddenly
Yes.
realize, hang on, I've been approaching this the wrong way. If I do it slightly differently, it's going to solve the whole thing so much more easily. And then I come back and smash it.
100% agree with that. And like one of the sort of metaphors I like to think about, and this is true for like just general planning as well, is that
Mm.
with ADHD, we have this tendency to either be really good at seeing the big picture
Mm.
or be really good at sort of seeing the details of something
Mm.
and really bad at keeping both of those ideas in mind together.
Yeah.
Right. And so being very intentional about, and understanding that, okay, so I'm either deep in the details or, very sort of like almost philosophical around the big ideas. But we need
Mm.
to be really checking in on both levels of that at the
Mm.
same time, or at least alternating between those two. So we make sure we're on the right track and they're not, developing scope creep and having something be bigger than what it is. But I
Mm.
absolutely find by stepping away for a little bit, and even a little bit can be, 5 minutes. It sort
Mm.
of helps us shift our mind from whatever details we're working on to sort of the bigger picture and seeing other perspectives. And I find that to be really helpful.
Yeah. One thing that helps with that, I interviewed someone who's an architect who is an architectural productivity expert. And
An
she was talking about
architectural, so is this a productivity expert that works with architects or someone that like designs architecturally productivity techniques?
kind of both.
Okay.
She was an architect for a long time and now she's a productivity expert. And she talked about how different rooms convey different types of bigger picture or smaller picture thinking. It's
Interesting.
basically if you put yourself in a cave-like environment where the walls are quite close and the ceiling is quite low, that's quite conducive towards deep focused work on the details. And then if you step into a cathedral-like environment, then it makes you connect with the bigger picture. You don't have to go to a cathedral. Going outside is a similar kind of effect because there's no ceiling. So I quite like that approach that I often have big picture ideas while I'm out for a run or a walk. I think it's somewhat related to being able to see the horizon and not having a ceiling.
Now, I've been doing this podcast for a while, and I maybe have heard that idea before, which is possible, but I actually don't think I ever have heard that idea before. And it's making me think of like how I sort of operate and think in different environments. And that's a really kind of neat idea to I was even thinking like, where do I like to have my breakfast at home? And it's in the room in my house that has the tall ceilings and the big windows, and because
Ah.
I'm more open to ideas and thinking
Mm.
in that space. Like I find that like sitting just at the kitchen table is like very confining to me.
Mm. Mhm.
Oh, it's really interesting. Hmm.
Mm. Yeah, it's probably a subconscious thing that your body gravitates towards certain spaces.
Yeah, and I know that I'm highly affected by my visual environment, and I know things like clutter drive me nuts, but you wouldn't think so because of how much clutter I have around me. But it does. It's like it definitely impacts the way my brain works. So
Mm.
what I want to do is sort of talk about how to kind of get into these micro workouts, how we can sort of use this during our day, and is it possible to actually stick with these kinds of things? So I want to cover all of those things, but first we're going to take a quick break and we will get to all of those things after the break. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our award-winning intensive online coaching and accountability groups at coachingrewired.com. Are you curious about what group coaching can do for you? Are you coming into this last week of January having intended to start your New Year's goals, but are wondering how the time has flown by already? What would be the impact if you could finally get started on those New Year's goals you made for yourself and create a plan to get those goals to the finish line? This is where group coaching can help. If you missed getting into our winter season of coaching groups, then don't worry, because our spring season of coaching and accountability groups is coming up fast. Our spring groups run from April 11th through June 31st. And we're kicking off registration on Thursday, February 15th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 Eastern. That website again is coachingrewired.com. Get your name added to our spring interest list, and we'll send you an email of your next steps. After 10 weeks of coaching, the one thing I can promise you is that you will still have ADHD. But the difference, once the 10 weeks are over, is that you will be equipped with shiny new tools and strategies to keep you moving forward with your wildly important goals. And you'll have a community of wonderful neurodivergent people to help you back up when you stumble and fall. Because ADHD management goes beyond just the tools. It is also about the people who are there for you to help you along the way. So get a head start by going to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our spring interest list, because registration starts in just a couple of weeks. That's on February 15th, Thursday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 Eastern. The website, one more time, is coachingrewired.com. Growth happens here. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back with Jeremy Nagel. All right, so Jeremy, you are doing these sort of regular, short, kind of micro workouts. And one of the things that you are kind of exploring and maybe thinking through yourself is this idea of consistency, right? Like, is it possible? What do you think?
It's something that always felt very elusive to me, because I had often operated on a model of working where I would just follow my hyperfocus, that I'd get excited about something and I would work until 2 a.m. And then the next day I'm shattered and I can't do anything. And it's sort of a cycle there of I recover after being completely shattered, and then the next day I get into hyperfocus again, or it might be a few days until I recover. And I wondered about, is there an alternate model where I wouldn't necessarily have the highs where I have one day and it feels like I do a week of work within one day, but then I'm wrecked for the next couple of days? Could I instead have days where I'm pretty consistent? I'm getting work done and I'm looking after myself at the same time. So I'm not suffering from sleep deprivation and from being trapped in my room all day.
I think the question there is how do you stop when the focus feels good?
Yeah.
Right. Because that's a huge part of hyperfocus, right? It feels good because we realize that like we're sort of in like hyperfocus and flow have some overlap, like where we completely lose track of time. But as you very rightfully identified, is that it wrecks us, right? Like it literally, like the next day or whatever after that period of hyperfocus, our EF tank is very slow to refuel.
Yeah.
So how do we stop when we feel like we are in such a good groove right now? How have you figured out how to stop?
I have realized I don't seem to have the internal capacity to stop myself. So I've had to set up external systems that break me out of hyperfocus. And that can be painful because it feels really nice to be in that groove. But I've recognized from a medium-term or long-term perspective, it seems like it's better for me to be interrupted. So what I started with was just having alarms, like a go to sleep alarm or wind down alarm at 8:30 p.m. So I would stop what I was doing. But I found they stopped being effective, even if I did things like have myself record myself saying, Jeremy, this is your future self telling you, you need to go to sleep right now.
I love that.
It kind of worked for a while, but then the novelty wore off.
Like all strategies, right? They
Yeah.
tend to work for a while. Let me ask you
Yeah.
this. So you had said in a very kind of matter-of-fact way, you had said that I don't have the ability to stop. And I point out that it was, the way you said it was very sort of just matter-of-fact. Which to me is, I'm making the assumption that have fairly accepted this part of you. Was it always that way?
Probably not. I think there's some inconsistency in it, that some days I am able to stop, other days I can't. But if we look at a month, I'd say that I'm only able to stop when I'm doing boring work. And if there's work that I love doing, I don't seem to be able to consistently stop myself. I don't know if that's common or not, but for me,
yeah.
it was.
Well, and I think too, stopping or shifting or transitioning is a highly demanding executive function, right? It's one of the reasons why I really try to avoid doing creative work when my meds have worn off, because my brain loves doing it when my meds have worn off, and I will not stop. Like I will go till 12, 1, 2 in the morning easily. And it's just something I used to do regularly. And I just realized that yes, I can do creative work during times of day that maybe I don't feel as creative, but it actually doesn't mean that I'm not as creative. It just doesn't feel as creative. And I think it's such an interesting thing to kind of observe in yourself, is what we think is it actually that, or does it just feel that way? Because man, feelings are convincing liars, right?
Totally.
So consistency then. So have you found, well, let me ask you this. Have you found yourself able to do anything consistently ever?
Not really in the past. In the last couple of years, I have been able to develop some consistency. I guess in the past, actually, I found consistency with body doubling. That, for example, with my exercise routine, I was really good at working out for quite a long time when I had a running buddy, and we would do long runs together, which is something that I find very difficult to do on my own, but with another person, it works quite well. And that's really the power of what you're doing with the adult study hall, and having people working together. That makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I've been thinking about getting back into doing some group meditation stuff, because I used to do that before COVID. And there was 2 different places in my local community that offered that. And it was great. And then when COVID hit, it's like, I don't want to do this online, even though which is funny because I'm all about online, community stuff. But there's just something about being in person with somebody else that really helps.
Yeah.
So if consistency is maybe at the best elusive, what do you think the options are then?
Well, what I've found is that body doubling isn't always available for me. So I set out to create a virtual body doubling system, essentially. And that's something that I started working on in late 2021. My initial target was something that would be more effective than an alarm, because I found that an alarm was too easy to ignore. So I wanted something where it would be parental controls for my inner child, essentially. Something that would stop me from using my computer and my phone in the evening. I built, with the help of someone online, I built a really crappy Mac app that looked really ugly. It had a password on it that kicked in after 8:30 p.m. And my wife has the password. I don't know what it is. So if there's an emergency, she'll unlock it for me, but otherwise I can't. And just that one thing made quite a big difference to my sleep, because I find that I am actually really tired at that point, but I don't notice it until I step away from my computer.
It's that the importance of really learning your patterns, because we often don't notice things in the moment, but we can, upon reflection, observe those patterns and then intervene kind of right before that moment of where we need that intervention. So with this idea of consistency, for many years, consistency was sort of considered the this holy grail to focus on for treatment of ADHD. How do we help people be more consistent? And I think for the first few years where I was really doing ADHD work professionally, I was on that I followed that school of thinking. And then after a while, I was like, you know what? I don't think that is actually something that we should go after. But people also are like, wait, but I need to be more consistent. I'm like, Okay, I hear you, but what can we do? Because what we can't always do is control when we're having good brain days and when we're having not good brain days. What we can do is when we are down, we don't have to beat ourselves up when we are down. We can
Hmm.
get back up, can focus on resilience, coming back to it, right? So if we can sort of accept that consistency is sort of one of the natures of the beast, right? Like the lack of ability to be regularly consistent is just part of what ADHD is. It's hard to do,
Mm.
but we can keep getting back up, and over time, if we kind of think about this like a law of averages, if we focus on the getting back up part, over time we're going to be fairly consistent.
Mm. Yeah.
So it's that idea of like the lagging indicator, right? Or it's like, what are we tracking and measuring, and is that the thing we want to be looking at? Like to me, consistency is a lagging indicator,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
Resilience, we can track and make decisions and take actions to get back up when we are down.
Mm. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I often used to beat myself up, especially if I was late for appointments or if I went to bed really late again. And that self-judgment and shaming doesn't help.
So I know you're into micro workouts. Were there any like ways you beat yourself up that helped with anything?
That helped. Well, sometimes I guess I used exercise as a way of processing negative emotions, that if I was feeling really ashamed at myself, I'd go out for a hard run. And that actually seemed to help. It felt like it was a form of catharsis through exercise.
Jeremy Science would also support that approach,
Yeah.
right? That idea of like when we have these intense, I almost want to call it the emotional toxicity. And I'm not talking about like toxic emotion. I'm just talking about the feeling internally where we can't kind of shake the feeling of yuck of like we screwed something up and we're just like, it's so frustrating, right? Doing something physical is what they call completing the stress response. So, and relates back to these ideas of burnout, where burnout isn't just addressed by addressing the stressor itself, it's by dealing with that internal feeling of stress, which is often, most frequently, effectively done through physical activity.
Mm. A bit like gazelles after they've been chased by a lion, shaking themselves off.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, absolutely. So we can use these micro workouts, as you're calling them, to not just to increase your focus, but when we are in the thick of an emotional storm, right?
Mm.
Also, that could be a really great tool.
Yeah, I do find it helps if I'm feeling a little bit annoyed at colleagues, that doing some push-ups seems to help, because I can get into RSD pretty easily. And then that doesn't help if I actually express it verbally. I need to process it a bit first.
It is funny because I'm someone who I don't get angry very often. But man, when I do get angry, my workouts can be so intense and like very satisfying in that way.
Hmm.
But yeah, like any of that emotional, like the stuff where it's just feels heavy. It's
Hmm.
a good place to go put that, is whether it's to hop on the elliptical for 20 minutes of going as high intensity as I can. But when you're talking about micro workouts, you're really talking about a minute or two, right?
Yeah, or even shorter. It
Really?
could be 30 seconds, and doing it frequently. But you can do it different ways. I think there's even, from a terminology wise, if you look at the literature on it, a micro workout is normally 5 minutes. And then there's exercise snacks, which are 30 seconds.
Exercise snacks. So what are some of your exercise snacks?
Well, I have about 8 different things that I do:
Okay.
burpees, push-ups, jumping jacks, squats, lunges, dips, sometimes do bridges, and some ab exercises. I set it up so that it will choose a random one for me during my breaks. That's another feature I added into Focus Bear. So it will remind me to go and take a break, and then it will automatically choose one of those exercises.
And what happens if you're having a case of the I don't wannas?
I can skip it, but it's something that I've recognized that actually it doesn't take that long and it makes a big difference. So I tend to do it. But it's something where I've tried to lean into the philosophy of tiny habits, which is from a book by BJ Fogg. And he talks about if there's a case of I don't want us, the recipe is not necessarily to not do it, but to instead reduce the duration and intensity so that it feels really easy. So if a minute of push-ups feels really hard, try 10 seconds. And then over time, build it up. That's what I started with. I began with doing 30 seconds. And then I progressively increased it to 40 seconds and then 50. And now I do a minute 20 of my exercise snacks.
Do you ever have it where your snacks turn into a meal?
Not normally.
Never.
Unless because I don't necessarily love doing resistance training. It's something that I'm doing because I know it's good for me. My form of exercise that I enjoy is more cardio. I really like running and cycling and cross-country skiing. And I've observed that I need some upper body strength for cross-country skiing. So I do resistance training to help with that, but it's not necessarily something that I enjoy for its own sake.
Are there any sort of like self-talk strategies that you have found helpful for yourself when those I don't wannas are coming into play?
There's a few. One is I don't have to do the full amount, just stand up and do one push-up. I find that helps. And then it's going to be good for you, but also potentially observing that if I am completely tired and I don't have enough energy to do a push-up, then maybe I don't have enough energy to be working right now and I should go have a nap.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Here's what I think we should do. Before we take a break, and I'm going to invite you and all of our listeners to join us, let's do 2 push-ups and then go into break. All right. So here we go. This is going to make awesome audio. Here we go. I'm moving my chair out of the way. The sounds of the groaning is what happens when you're almost 43 years old and you're trying to get down to the floor. Okay. All right. 1, 2. Okay, that's it. We're going to take a quick break and we will be right back. Hey there, ADHD Rewired listeners. Do you ever find yourself trying to focus on a task, but your brain is like a hyperactive squirrel at a nut festival? Well, fear not. Introducing the Focus-O-Matic 3000. The Focus-O-Matic 3000 is the latest, greatest, and only imaginary solution to your wandering mind. It's a state-of-the-art make-believe device that you wear on your head like a hat, but 78% sillier looking. Simply put it on and voila! The Focus-O-Matic 3000 gently redirects every wandering thought back to your task. Thinking about what to have for lunch during a meeting? Zap! Back to the spreadsheet. Wondering if the penguins have knees during a deep work session? Zoom! You are back to writing that report. But wait, there's more. Order now, and we'll throw in a patented we'll throw in a patented do it again. Oh, but it's a patented. We'll throw in a patented distraction distractor. It's a small device that distracts your distractions. It's like a decoy for your brain. And for those moments when you're trying to sleep, but your brain is hosting a TED Talk titled, Every Embarrassing Thing I've Ever Done, we present the No More Oops Dreamscape. Just imagine putting it on and you'll drift into the most boring dream ever. Guaranteed to put that overactive mind to rest. The Focus-O-Matic 3000 Distraction Distractor and No More Oops Dreamscape can be yours for just 12 easy payments of absolutely nothing, because they don't exist. But you know what does exist? The ADHD Rewired podcast is packed with real strategies, stories, support, and community, because we get it. No imaginary gadgets are required. So, while we can't sell you the Focus-O-Matic 3000, we can offer you a weekly dose of ADHD rewired goodness. So tune in and let's get our brains back on track for real. To find out everything ADHD Rewired, from our virtual co-working community to our intensive online coaching groups and everything else that we do, go to ADHDrewired.com. ADHD Rewired Podcast, because reality is the best invention of all. Disclaimer, no squirrels or penguins were harmed in the making of this ad. All right, we are back with Jeremy Nagel. All right, so we were talking a bit about, before we even get it back into that, if you did join us for doing push-ups, kudos to you. That was awesome. Jeremy told us that he almost knocked over his bookshelf though while doing it, and I actually found a little desk clock that I couldn't find, and it was on the floor. So that was exciting. All right, so
normally I moved to another space, but I thought I should still be on camera. I've discovered it's not a good location to do push-ups right next to my desk.
Well, environment, it does matter. So maybe that's something to explore, is how do we modify our environment to make, these kinds of things easier for us, which is, a pretty good ADHD strategy in general, is how do we set up our environment to be more conducive for what we want and need to do. So you wanted to talk a little bit about not just consistency, but consistency and variation.
Yep. Because I agree with you that consistency in terms of doing exactly the same thing each day and having exactly the same brain each day isn't possible. But I feel that it's possible to reduce the amount of variation each day in a good way, in the sense that if I work until 12 a.m. every day and then I don't sleep enough, then the next day is going to be horrible. But if I have a relatively consistent amount of sleep, and I do a consistent amount of exercise, and I have relatively consistent amounts of breaks, I'm not going to have the same day each day, but I'm going to have a more regular day. And it's a bit like what you were saying around creativity, that if I ride the creative high, then that's going to be great one day, but from a long-term perspective, it's not going to be the same. One thing that I do in that regard is I'm working on a book, and I'm working on it in a measured way where I spend 10 minutes each morning writing the book, whether I'm feeling inspired or not. On days that I'm not feeling particularly inspired, I might only write 50 words. On days that I'm really in the groove, I'll be able to smash out 150 words in that time. And it adds up from a long-term perspective. What do you think about that in terms of not necessarily being robots, but having more routine and contributing to some level of consistency?
I love sort of the paradox of routine with ADHD, in that it is so helpful for our brains, and yet so many of us recoil when we think about like routine. Like, that just sounds so boring, right? And it's like, is having the surprise variety show every day, is that more interesting? Like, maybe, but what are the downsides to that? Because there are plenty, so trying to have a lot of your day be as routine as possible. And you can even create flexibility and variety within that, predictability and that regular approach to something that you're doing. The more we are able to get ourselves into various routines, the less we are having to tax our executive functions to do the work that we're trying to do within that routine, right? Which then also saves us executive function for the new and novel things that come up during the day, and for that ability to, say, all right, it's 5 o'clock, I'm in the groove, but you know what? I'm going to just take a few minutes, capture the rest of my thoughts here, and then stop for the day, right? Which doing that requires executive function, right? Stopping requires executive function. So does starting, right? Which is why we tend to get into hyperfocus, because we're like, oh, I finally got started, so I don't know when I'm going to get this groove again, so I'm going to just keep going for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, right? But it's short-sighted. So I do think that having some variation is helpful. I know even with exercise, and I definitely have this tendency where it's either all pickleball all the time, or I'm just on my elliptical, and not mixing up the variety. And, I think if you talk to any person that knows anything about fitness, they would say variety is really important for longevity, which is
Mm.
important.
Hmm. Yep. I'm speaking with a hamstring injury right now from probably having done too much running.
So, yeah, I mean, what do you think about that, the idea of consistency and having variation within your routines?
Yeah, I really like that idea. One thing I do is, say, with my meditation, I meditate each day, but I have a different meditation music track each day. Not completely different. I've got four that the system will choose from, but it will choose a random one each day. And I like that I don't know what I'm going to get. I know that I'm going to get meditation, but is it going to be this weird sci-fi video in the background with some sort of weird music, or is it going to be more of the classical music? And the same thing with yoga, that I've got 10 different yoga videos that it'll choose for me, and I'll do one of those 10-minute yoga videos, but I don't know which one.
So it sounds like you've done some front loading of the
Mm.
things that you'll be kind of fed with the tools that you've created, and
Yeah.
then allow for some randomness and variability within that.
Yeah. Mm.
So, what's hard about that for you?
The parts that are hard are probably recognizing that even if I get enough sleep and even if I do my meditation and my exercise, my brain isn't always going to be on each day. And that can be frustrating, that I feel like I've done everything right, but I still feel tired today. And what do I do about that? And I think that really harkens back to what you were saying earlier about avoiding shaming and adopting resilience, that just noticing today I'm not feeling that great and I can have a slower day. I can still try and do some work, but I'm not going to be able to perform to the level that I did the other day where I was feeling amazing.
So, how do you sort of cultivate whatever it is that you need to do to allow yourself when you're having that sort of bad brain day? Like, how do you treat yourself?
It feels relatively intuitive that if I'm feeling tired, then I'm just going to have a slow day. But I guess the things that are important for me there is to not compound it, because in the past, what I would probably have done is go to bed and maybe play on my phone for half the day when I was having a bad day like that. And that doesn't actually really help. It sort of feels like it helps in the moment, but from a long-term perspective, it doesn't really, because then it sets up my brain to have this pattern that when I'm feeling tired, the way to deal with that is to go and snuggle myself in my doona. So what I try to do is on days like that, I have people that I can talk to about it. I've got a bunch of friends that I'll talk to on good days and bad days, and we sort of balance each other out. That on days where I'm feeling great, I'm there to help other people, and on days where I'm not feeling great, I'm sort of using that network to help me to get back into the groove, using, I guess, body doubling in that way.
I love that. I love that. I think it's reaching out for help when you're sort of in struggle. I think that's such an important idea. Like, don't struggle alone. Don't ADHD alone. I mean, I think that's like that's maybe that should be our new tagline. It should be wired. Don't ADHD alone, right? Because
Mm.
it is so important. It's because that's where shame grows, is when we're in our own heads, when we're just by ourselves, and we're sitting in our own shit, right? Where we're like,
Mm.
we screwed up again, right? It's like, okay, don't sit in that space alone.
Yeah.
Self compassion is, to me, it's something that I've known for many years. And the more I do this work, the more I just see how like paramount it is to forward progress, is to have that self compassion when we are stuck, when we're
Mm.
doing everything right, and yet like our brain has other plans, right? Like, it's so frustrating, but like we can't beat ourselves up even though we're frustrated, right? It's like,
Mm.
okay, like getting curious, like I feel like I'm doing everything right. Like, what's going on that's making I still feel like I'm having a hard time, say, focusing today or getting this thing done, or I'm having a hard time starting these tasks, or I notice I'm avoiding these types of things more often. Or like, I know for myself, like one of my sort of like barometers for how I'm doing is how many dishes I leave in the sink,
Yep.
right? Because like there are times where like I clean up as I go and it's not hard at all. And there are
Mm.
other times I look at like my kitchen and I'm just like, oh my God, like someone just give me a match because that's going to be easier and I'll just start over. Right. Like, and it's like, okay, what's going on? And, yes, it comes down to a lot of the self-care stuff, sleep, exercise, stress. But sometimes the answers aren't always obvious. And I think it really requires a lot of self-compassion to sort of sit in that space, trying to find solutions when there's not any that are immediately obvious. But I don't know of any other way forward in a way that's healthy by any degree. Right?
Yeah.
So getting back up, being consistent, bite-sized little snacks to help us sort of through any moment, whether it's because we're having difficulty with focus and attention, or just to shift an emotional storm. What else do you think is, like, where else do you think micro workouts could be helpful?
Maybe not micro workouts, but I think the other thing I find helpful is externalizing my executive functioning at times for days where the EF tank is low. That's where, for example, the cutoff time in the evening is really important. And with Focus Spare, I added in distraction blocking because I found that on days where I'm feeling low energy, I have a tendency to go Wikipedia surfing and go in and chase the news headlines, read Reddit, things that are not really conducive to me getting things done. So being able to have limits in place so that I'm not going to go down those rabbit holes is really helpful. Because on good days, I don't need the limits because I'm hyper-focused. I'm very clear on what I need to get done. But on days where I'm not feeling that great, it's very easy for me to go down the wrong path. And having my past self, having set up the sites that I shouldn't access, that's very helpful.
How is it possible to get around those sites that you've blocked?
It is, but it creates a bit of a speed bump. It takes a little bit of time to unblock it. And often that little bit of time and the pop-up that appears, it gives me a slight guilt trip in a good way, not a shaming way, but you said you didn't want to access this site. Are you sure you want to? That's enough to sometimes snap me out of the bad train of thought and make me realize, hang on, maybe I'll just write down that I want to go check Reddit later and I'll do it at the end of my workday instead of right now.
It's sort of that the power of the pause, right? Just like slow down that moment where you are feeling like you're wanting to take another path, where you're wanting to go, check the website that is just, I don't know, something that your curiosity got intrigued by. Maybe it's you're trying to emotionally regulate because you're working on something hard. And so, what's our favorite way to emotionally regulate? Procrastination. Right? Like, well, like this is hard. Let me go do something else because that's not going to feel so bad. But then you're still left with whatever you're working on is not getting done.
Yeah.
Right? So that pause, it can be really, really important. Jeremy, is there anything else that you want to share with listeners?
The other thing I want to share is we were talking about dishes just before. And I want to share about mindfulness and meditation. I find it really hard to sit down and meditate. But I actually find doing the dishes is an amazing way for me to meditate. And I wonder about reframing it. The reason that I came to see it that way is I was couch surfing in Switzerland and I was staying with this guy who used to be, maybe he was a monk, maybe that's saying it too high, but he used to really be into meditation. And he said, these days I don't meditate anymore. I just do the dishes. And that's my meditation time. And I really love that idea. And it has changed the way that I view household chores, that instead of needing to listen to a podcast, you should listen to this podcast, but don't do it while you're doing the dishes. Instead, use that as time to have busy hands and a quiet mind, and you might be amazed at the ideas that come to you while you're doing the dishes.
So instead of doing the dishes, I'm gonna meditate. And the dishes are gonna get done while I do that.
Karma yoga is another way I've heard it termed.
What is it called?
Karma yoga, like Karma.
Karma yoga. Okay. Huh. I like that idea. I think this is true for just so much of living well with ADHD. It often requires 1,001 creative outside of the box strategies, because so many strategies will work for a while until they don't. So the positive part of that, if we do have that growth mindset and really are motivated by forward motion, that we're going to build a pretty big toolbox because we need to, right? Because the stuff that works one day might not work the next, and we need to come up with other strategies for that. So it's like, above all else, there is no one right way to do anything around ADHD, right? It's do what works.
Yeah, for the moment. It might not work a month later or a week later.
Right? Do what works for now. All right. The website is focusbear, BEAR.io. And just really quickly, what can people get when they go to that website?
We've got a bunch of blog posts. The main thing on the site is we've got several apps. We've got Late No More, which is a punctuality app for people with ADHD, where it's very in your face. It has multiple visual reminders that increase in intensity, and then it starts either talking to you or playing a Spotify song. For me, I've got this song by Guttermouth called You're Late. And if I'm in another room, I can hear that playing. That's really helpful for making me show up on time. The other thing we have is the FocusBear app, which is a cross-platform habit and distraction management tool. So it helps with the micro workouts, with evening and morning routines, and preventing going down rabbit holes.
Awesome. And the podcast is Focus and Chill. And you can find out all the stuff that we were talking about here at your website?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any other sort of contact information you would like to give listeners?
Yeah, I'd love to connect with people. LinkedIn is generally the best way if you find me on LinkedIn, or use the contact form on the website.
Okay. And we will have links to all of that in this episode's show notes. Jeremy Nagel, thank you so much. And, I know this will probably be airing after the new year, but we're recording this right before that. So I hope you have a happy holidays and a happy new year.
Same to you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you again to Jeremy for joining me on the show, and thank you, ADHD ear buddies, for making it to the end. What are your thoughts on micro habits, and what fun ways do you incorporate movement into your day? Join in on the conversation by becoming a part of our free and secret Facebook group at ADHDrewired.com/community. How does boosting your productivity and tackling your toughest projects and to-dos with guided co-working sessions and accountability sound? What about real-time around-the-clock body doubling and ADHD-friendly co-working? You can get started in our Adult Study Hall community at adultstudyhall.com. Are you new to ADHD Rewired, or are you a regular listener of the show but haven't left us a rating and review yet? If not, we would love it if you did, because your ratings and reviews help get this show in front of more earballs. And if you love the show, why not consider becoming a patron over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. This show is free to you, the listener, but it is not free to produce, and we appreciate all of the awesome patrons. Patrons at $5 a month or more can enjoy an uninterrupted listening experience of this show, and members at $25 a month can join me for a monthly coaching call every fourth Tuesday of the month. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon to find all the levels and all the perks. Otherwise, find everything ADHD Rewired, including show notes for this podcast, at ADHDrewired.com. And one more big thank you again to Jeremy for joining me today. And thank you to you, the listener, for tuning in until the end. That's all for now, and we'll catch you next week.